Part 2. The Philosophy of Healing. A diagram of the magnetic fields of the human being. A. The physical body. B. The functional or etheric body. C. The emotional body. D. The mental body. E. The energy field. F. The circumference of personality, the abode of the principles of the body. Chapter 6. Esoteric Physiology. Some fundamentals, the three invisible bodies of man, the body and the abode of divinity, the human aura, the secret of all function and growth, the four ethers, the physical or chemical ether, the functional or vital ether, the emotional or psychic ether, the mental or intellectual ether, the human will, the voice of conscience, general observations. Some fundamentals. The topic at hand is difficult to present, especially in summary form. The most complete expression requires little or no use of synonyms. Those that could be used are confusing and inaccurate. Essential words will therefore be repeated where necessary for the sake of clarity. According to the doctrines of the occult sciences, the physical body of man is a vehicle for the manifestation of invisible spiritual energies. These energies not only sustain the body itself, but also flow through it, manifesting as attitudes, impulses, and functional processes of external life. This viewpoint of the ancient philosophers can be summarized in one definition. Man is a metaphysical being, inhabiting the supraphysical worlds. He is revealed to our perceptions of the material senses through his physical body, which is the least part of his composite nature. One school of materialist psychology teaches that thought and emotions arise within the physical body, with individuality, character, and temperament being the result of external pressures from the environment and events. Intelligence is thus identified as a form of bodily insinuation, originating from the chemical activity within the substance itself. Mystics believe that intellectual and moral energy flows within the body. These energies mold the form in their own image, and thus establish the true causes of all of man's phenomenal life. It is not possible to understand the principles of occult healing without an understanding of the fourfold constitution of the human being. The human personality is composed of a mental nature, an emotional nature, a functional nature, and a physical nature. Of these four natures, only the physical is visible, but the powers of the three remaining higher natures can be discovered through the study of their effects upon the physical nature. The physical body of all living beings is a mineral organism. In itself, it is merely a kind of refined stone. According to Hindu mystics, it is the hard rock that was softened, as described in the Tibetan Book of Dzyan, but it remains a mineral structure. Let us consider the composition of the human body. Oxygen, 65%, carbon, 18%, hydrogen, 10%, nitrogen, 3%, calcium, 2%, and phosphorus, 1%. The remaining 1% consists of small amounts of potassium, sodium, chlorine, magnesium, iron, iodine, fluorine, and silicon. No matter how these elements are arranged and combined, the occult philosopher asserts that they could not hide from the genius of Leonardo da Vinci or the mental brilliance of Plato, or, if all the listed chemical elements were combined in their correct proportions, the result would not be a man, but an inert mass. Is it then a mystical abstraction to believe that a human being is nothing more than their physical body? Is it not far more reasonable to consider man as the intangible power that serves as the soul of the elements, animating them in the vehicle of their purposes? The mechanistic school of physics has long attempted to demonstrate that the universe and humankind are self-operating machines, and thus there is no need for the hypothesis of a conscious or intellectual principle in nature to explain the mystery of life. But although machines may be marvelous and very well made, human beings must build them, and human beings must operate them, and when, for some reason, they stop working, human beings must repair them. For all practical purposes, the human body is a machine, the most perfect machine in the world. It is capable of almost unbelievable delicacy in its functioning, and is responsive to the impulses of the will, but like all mechanical devices, it is composed of material substances, useless unless directed by intelligence, and inert and powerless unless endowed with a soul by a conscious spirit. The three invisible bodies of man. Behind the physical form visible to the eyes is man himself, clothed in three intangible yet very real bodies of specialized energy. The first is composed of mental substance, the material from which thoughts are made. The second is composed of emotional substance, the sensitive fabric of feelings and desires, and the third is composed of vital substance, the functional energy without which the physical forms could not survive. Man thinks not with his brain but through his brain. The brain is merely a sensitized area of physical matter that reacts to the subtle impulses of the mental body. Similarly, emotions and functions are communicated to the physical body through the liver and spleen, and these organs are merely distributors of specialized impulses, not their originators. Nothing originates in the body except inertia. All its activity is communicated to the body from one of the zones of metaphysical energy. This is why the ancients did not refer to the physical body as a principle, but as a container of principles. Like the canopic jar of the ancient Egyptians, it receives within itself the waters of life and distributes them into the world through its many mouths. In order to make these process sequences more easily understandable, they can be organized in a table as follows: principles and powers, energies, the quadruple body, etheric mediums, physical organs, mental principle, ether mental, emotional principle, emotional energy, physical body, physical ether. Behind the principles of the body lies spiritual consciousness. But the spirit cannot become ill, because it remains in the perfect state of its nature. Nor can any direct healing power be exerted except through the fourfold personality, which has been established as the appropriate medium for the mechanics of its biological processes, the body and the dwelling place of divinity. That the deity is outside of or separate from his creation is a doctrine of Christianity. Only a few religious systems teach it. All enlightened pagans taught that the material universe is the physical body of the creative principle. Plato called the universe the eternal animal, and the Neoplatonists of Alexandria described the world as the body of the blessed God. The modern occultist accepts this philosophical doctrine. He does not look to the distant heavens for the spiritual cause of all things, but finds creation itself bearing splendid witness to his divine abode. The personality of the solar system, the sun and the group of celestial bodies that revolve around it, is composed of four types of substance: mental substance, emotional substance, functional substance, and physical substance. In the solar system, these substances of the spheres are called planes, and together they represent the personality of the solar god. These four strata are the four worlds of philosophical Kabbalah, and it was in the essence of these four worlds that the four Adams came into being. Man has a body to correspond with each of the planes of nature. Each of these bodies of man is composed of the substance of the plane in which it originated. They grow and develop on that plane, are subject to the laws that govern that plane, and finally disintegrate back into the basic matter of that plane. These four bodies are the four Adams, and the physical body is the last Adam, the one who fell into matter and put on the fur coat. It can be somewhat difficult to grasp that the mind is truly a body, and not merely a strange, empty vessel with thoughts floating around in it. Our way of thinking has long accepted as matter only those things with which we can have contact through our sensory perceptions. However, we know that the five senses are only at the beginning of their development. and many real things lie beyond the current sensory range. There are countless sounds that the human ear cannot hear, colors and shapes that the human eye cannot see, flavors that the human taster cannot register, odors that the human olfactory sense cannot detect, and substances so refined that they cannot be felt by the human sense of touch. Only in recent years has science come to understand the limitations of human sensory perceptions, recognizing the possibility of the essence and reality of invisible things. The human aura, the physical body of man, and the supraphysical bodies that support it, show their correct relationship to one another in the diagram of magnetic fields. To the trained clairvoyant, the higher bodies B, C, and D are seen as fields of light. These constitute what is commonly known as the aura. The ancients refer to this aura as the invisible perspiration because it appears to emanate from the physical form. Currently, the only part of the aura that arises from the physical body is the etheric envelope, B. The emotional and mental auras, C and D, are magnetic fields of energy that flow into the body and intervene in its functions through the etheric envelope. The E represents an energy field that has not yet differentiated into a body, but will become the vehicle of man's spiritual nature when he has been perfected by the processes of evolution. The F is the circumference of personal existence, the shell of the auric egg, in which the human creature lives, moves, and has its being. The importance of the functional body, or etheric double, as it is often called, will now become clear. It is the link that connects the physical body A with the emotional bodies C and D. The ethers are the great mystery of occultism. It is through knowledge of them and their operation that the metaphysician comes to understand the workings of spiritual force in the material world, the secret to all function and growth. The ancients recognized 4 ethers, or 4 etheric essences, that serve as a link between the spiritual energies of man and the physical substances through which they operate. This is the true explanation of the 4 humours of Hippocrates. The modern physicist defines ether as a postulated medium for the transmission of light waves, but for the occultist, the ethers are the secret of all function and growth. The ethers, physical in origin, are now the subtlest parts of matter. The etheric emanations of the earth fill the planet's inner atmosphere, so that, as Thales of Miletus described it, the earth appears to float in a moist vapor, a diluted or attenuated water. This etheric moisture is invisible to physical perception, but can be examined by those who possess etheric vision. When seen, it resembles a thin, dimly luminous mist, faintly layered. Its lower parts are placid and immutable, but its upper layers are in a state of constant agitation. Near the earth, and above the bodies of living beings, the etheric mist is more pronounced and shines with a blue-green light. This light surrounds minerals, plants, animals, and human beings with bright halos. The etheric emanations from the lower realms are not as bright as those from humans. The 4 ethers. The 4 ethers and the parts they play in the economy of human life are as follows. 1. Physical or chemical ether, the bond of form. 2. Functional or vital ether, the bond of energy. 3. Emotional or psychic ether, the bond of impulse. 4. Mental or intellectual ether, the bond of thought. These ethers have laws that govern them and inherent qualities in their nature that every metaphysical healer must know and learn to utilize. A considerable portion of physical illness or disease originates in the etheric bonds, and not in the material body. Even contagions and infections are largely the result of disturbances in the etheric sheaths. For example, consider ethers as protection against bacterial infections. In a normal state of health, the physical body is surrounded by etheric rays that flow through the pores, enveloping the form in a shimmering aura. This aura is a natural defense, repelling contagion and infection, and destroying germs that enter its field. But if, for any reason, the body's chemical vitality is depleted, these sterilizing etheric rays lose their power, and can no longer combat harmful microorganisms. The physical or chemical ether. Throughout life, a pale electric mist hovers over the human skeleton. This is the physical ether, and it appears to originate in the bone marrow. From there, it flows along the formations of the heavier chemicals, touching every cell and organ of the body with its mysterious light. Pronounced condensations of this same ether envelop most of the vital organs. The strange glow is especially bright in the heart, where it serves as a focus for the body's physical principle, which is located at the apex of the left ventricle. The inorganic chemical processes of the human body are controlled and regulated by natural energies that operate through the physical ether. This ether acts as a chemical binder, maintaining the arrangement of the patterns of the elements that compose the body's form. Due to its unique cohesive power, it serves as a matrix that holds within itself all the basic substances involved in human chemistry. The physical ether is most active in childhood, from the first year to the 7th, during which time crystallizing activities are establishing order in the inorganic structure that will serve as the basis for organic life. In the newborn, this ether is derived directly from the maternal womb and carries the ancestral records implanted in the fertilized cell at the moment of impregnation. It is the means by which hereditary tendencies are perpetuated and the cause of familial resemblance. Racial differences are also largely preserved, and organic quality is determined. Physical ether is the densest and most material of the 4 etheric essences, and it is very similar to the physical body from which it emanates, as both are bound by an intense vibratory sympathy. Followers of Paracelsus taught that this ether could be damaged by cutting instruments, blows, wounds, and various accidents affecting the physical body. Higher ethers allow for the repair of body tissues when cut or injured, but chemical ether is entirely inorganic, and injuries do not heal. The marks remain, and their shadows on the flesh are called scars or scar tissue. Plastic surgery can often eliminate physical scars. However, plastic surgery has no effect on etheric records. People with clairvoyance can see the abrasions, even after all traces have seemingly been removed. Although the physical ether imprints the patterns that shape matter, alterations can result in deformities, monstrosities, and imperfect births. Such bodies rarely survive because they lack the perfection that allows the proper manifestation of the higher principles of life through them. Childhood illnesses, especially those in which bones do not harden properly or crystallize too quickly, are due to alterations in the physical ether. The common reservoir of chemical ether is the earth, and those suffering from a deficiency in the activity of this ether should make contact with the earth as much as possible. However, they should not be exposed to direct sunlight. Minerals from food are essential for them, and additional mineral supplementation may be indicated. If there is an excess of crystallization, mineral intake should be reduced, and the supply of functional ether increased accordingly. In Europe, occultists have been experimenting with the polarities that can be adopted in the body to increase the flow of ethers. One of the substances they have been working with is meteoric iron. Due to its enormous magnetic energies, this material is useful for combating deficiencies in etheric energies. Paracelsus believed that chemical drugs are important for the body, not because they can be assimilated, but because they restore the magnetic poles and attract the ethers that are so necessary for physical health. The functional, or vital, ether. The human body is a vast complex of radiant energy. This force flows through all the nerves, so that each fiber seems filled with an inner light. It shines within the cellular tissue, and the tiny particles appear like small stars. Around the spleen, its unique center in the body, a bright aura forms. It spills forth pulsating waves from the nerve endings and extends several centimeters beyond the skin. This ether fills the entire structure with vitality and life. and wherever it performs its functions, it gathers its luminous substances and energizes the organs and muscles for their tasks. The essential functions of life, growth, reproduction, assimilation, excretion, and circulation, are maintained by the forces that flow through the vital ether. It also distributes pigmentation. This ether regulates the supply of life energy, called prana by Hindus, which sustains the entire organic structure, thus maintaining the functions of living tissues. Just as chemical ether is associated with the body's solids, functional ether is related to the fluids and was known to the ancients as water of life. This vital ether is closely involved in all processes of human growth and is especially active from the 7th to the 14th year, the period of most rapid physical development. As a result of the abundance of functional etheric energy during this time, there is a rapid increase in the number of cells, with a corresponding expansion of the body's structure. In adults, the primary function of this ether is to restore tissue damaged by physical, emotional, or mental activity, and to rebuild structures destroyed or weakened by illness. The feeling of well-being enjoyed by healthy individuals is a direct result of the normal flow of vitality through the channels of functional ether. Nature has entrusted the perpetuation of species to the vital ether, and the vortex of this substance resides in seeds, eggs, and animal cells, making them fertile. The astonishing resilience of this etheric atom is attested to in several remarkable ways. Wheat found in the hand of an Egyptian pharaoh buried more than 3,000 years ago was planted and grew. However, the principle of fertility is so sensitive that the slightest alteration of the body's magnetic poles can result in sterility. Although the vital ether is derived from the sun, its activity in the human body is most intense during sleep. It sustains and regulates automatic and involuntary functions and repairs the effects of daily wear and tear. If sleep is disturbed, this work is disrupted, and the next day the person doesn't feel as well. Most illnesses involving the functional ether result from a person's failure to cooperate with their body's biochemical requirements. The effort needed to repair damage caused by poor habits, inadequate diet, overwork, and physical exhaustion can overload this energy flow beyond its capacity. Furthermore, the vital ether must cope with the depressive and demoralizing effects of destructive thought patterns and emotional excesses that adversely affect the physical structure. Benign enlargements and growths, gigantism and dwarfism, overstimulation of bodily functions, disturbances of bodily rhythms, and some types of obesity are diseases of the vital ether. Anemia is an advanced form of etheric weakness. Sunbathing helps in many cases, but excesses must be avoided, and it should only be undertaken under proper guidance. It is a good rule to remember that functional ether will serve a person well if they are moderate in all things and do not expect impossible results from nature. The chemical and vital ethers have an interesting photographic quality. As they permeate the entire atmosphere of the earth, they are present in every place a person might occupy. A person walking through a room leaves an image of themselves in the ethers of the room, and also a vibrational record of their personality and character. These etheric images remain for some time after the person has left. A psychometrist may enter the room later and describe everything that has happened there, and sometimes may do the same after examining the articles of clothing or jewelry impregnated with the etheric emanations of the previous owners. These ethers are especially active in water. Magical vessels filled with water were often used by primitive healers and ancient mystics in their divinations. There is evidence that the famous Nostradamus obtained some of his prophetic powers from spirits he had captured in containers of magnetized water, and Cagliostro employed similar methods in his seances. The photographic power and vibratory sympathies of the ether are the basis of new theories of extrasensory perception. Etheric essences possess what the ancients called the Amazonian quality. The word Amazonian means beyond the zone, that is, beyond the limits of place. According to this doctrine, like beings are always close to one another regardless of what we call distance. A man had an amputated leg, and since he knew nothing about the theory of ethers, he was indifferent to the removal of the limb. As time passed, the man continued to feel pain in the leg he had lost, and this is not an unusual phenomenon, since part of the leg's etheric body remained with him. But in this case, the pain became increasingly intense, and he felt as if a sharp object were piercing the amputated limb. Finally, the leg, which had been buried in a wooden box, was unearthed, and upon examination, it was discovered that a careless worker had driven a nail through the lid of the box and into the leg. This nail was removed, and the patient immediately experienced greater comfort. Paracelsus recorded such cases, but they are of no interest to modern physicians until something unusual happens to one of their patients. The activity of the functional ether can continue for a short time after the death of the physical body. There is evidence that hair continues to grow on the dead. This is denied by some modern authorities, but older medical writers give numerous examples. A curious book by Oswald Crowley, a disciple of Paracelsus, passed through my hands some time ago. In this work, he describes a rare case in which hair continues to grow on the skin of an animal stretched on a wall. General Albert Pike mentions the vital power of acacia wood, which in Syria continues to sprout after the tree has been cut down, sawn into planks, and used to build doors. The emotional or psychic ether. Through the arterial system of the human body flows a pale pink light with a green band of etheric force. This is the emotional ether. It runs along the blood vessels in a constant state of pulsation. Everywhere there is movement. Around the organs, especially in the intestinal tract, this fiery substance swirls and swirls. The main center of the psychic ether is in the liver, and the great vortex of this important gland is a sea of swirling pink fire. This ether is sensitive to the individual's emotional impulses and glows brightly during moments of intense feeling or desire. It registers every mood of the psychic nature, and when self-control is lost for any reason, as in the case of extreme anger, the effect on the ethers resembles a miniature volcanic eruption. Such outbursts cause considerable damage to the etheric structure. If they occur too frequently, they eventually destroy emotional control. Through the emotional ether, the physical body of man unites with his supraphysical body of feeling and desire. The two lower ethers are vehicles for involuntary natural processes, but the third ether carries within the emotional centers of the nervous system the fears, anger, disgust, sadness, joy, surprise, and longings of the metaphysical self. It is evident, therefore, that this ether is heavily charged with impulses, many of which are far from constructive. In addition to its other responsibilities, the psychic ether must also distribute the power of movement and support sensory perceptions. In human development, the emotional ether is most active between the 14th and 21st years. Significant changes occur in the physical body during this period, and equally significant changes in the mental landscape. It has been observed that many of the less advanced races experience unusual difficulties during this time. Often, children of these races are mentally alert until adolescence, and then lose the capacity for further intellectual advancement. A school teacher verified this for me. She taught a class and observed that the children were exceptionally bright until the age of 14, and after that age, they were unable to learn anything. Impulses from the external world enter the emotional and mental bodies through the sensory perceptions. Emotional life is largely conditioned by external factors and personal reactions to them. A person's general convictions largely determine their impulses. the evidence of sensory perceptions is returned to the emotional body via the etheric bridge, and the emotional body's reactions to this evidence are then returned via the same ether to the emotional centers of the physical body. In this case, the etheric medium carries emotional impulses in both directions. The emotional ether can be damaged by an overload of intense feeling or desire, just as too much electrical current damages a wire. With its proper function disrupted, the ether can allow an overflow of emotional content, or it can become so weakened that emotional reflexes almost cease. A lack of reasonable emotional control is the cause of numerous physical ailments. On the other hand, excessive self-control can be equally disastrous. All extremes are destructive. Moderation and proper use are the essential virtues. Hysteria is one of the most common ailments due to an imbalance of the psychic ether. Irresistible feelings flow through the body, overwhelming judgment and self-control. Hallucinations of various kinds and a wide variety of psychic disorders can be attributed to imbalances of this ether. Homosexuality is often the result of psychochemical imbalances in the composition of the functional and psychic ethers. It should be remembered that the ethers enter a state of disease as a result of abnormal conscious impulses transmitted through them. When a breakdown occurs, it is not the ethers themselves that are at fault, but rather the quality of the material they are meant to distribute. The mental or intellectual ether. The upper half of the human body is surrounded by a soft golden light that appears to originate in the central part of the brain. The bright currents of light from the third ventricle, in particular, enclose the head in a halo, like those depicted around the heads of saints. This yellow radiance extends down the spinal column to the sixth ventricle, and its luminous force touches the spinal nerves. The greater a person's intellectual life, the greater the activity of the mental ether. Its substances and currents are constantly responding to the impulse of thought, and the quality of the mental perspective can change the colors in the etheric medium from yellow to deep orange, and even light green. The intellectual consciousness of the individual flows within the organism in the currents of the mental ether. For the psychologist, the mind is the totality of the human being's states of consciousness, but for the philosopher, the mind is the consciousness of the perceptive, reflective, and imaginative person. It is in this sense that the occultist views the intellect. The mental ether unites the conscious mind with the magnetic field of the pineal gland, which is the mental concentration in the physical body. The ways in which mental impulses are distributed through the objective processes of the brain are so important in metaphysical healing that a later chapter is devoted to considering the subject in detail. The intellectual ether is the most volatile of the etheric essences, and is the last to develop in human maturity. Its activity begins to be observed in the personality around the age of 21, but the period of maximum intensity occurs between the ages of 45th and 60th. In the case of a child prodigy, this ether takes hold earlier in life, which can cause problems because the physical body is not yet sufficiently developed to withstand the strain of an adult mind. The mental ether is susceptible to disturbances of thought and can be seriously harmed by chronic habits of erroneous thinking. The four ethers are sensitive to impulses of thought, and if they have been seriously affected by faulty mental processes, the consequences are gradually transferred to the physical structure as chronic illnesses. Mental senility, memory loss, and impaired thinking are often due to a decrease in this ether. It is an ancient occult belief that most forms of madness do not result from a failure of the mind, but rather arise from the physical brain or the ethers that support it. If complexes and obsessions become too intense, they will destroy the subtle magnetic fields that connect the mind to the brain. The brain, in turn, deprived of the energy necessary for its processes, exhibits various symptoms of decline and deterioration. it must always be remembered that the ethers originate in the physical body. Here, the subject of nutrition becomes a spiritual science. The powers of the ethers depend on proper nutrition, relaxation, sleep, sunlight, exercise, the normal expression of emotions, and the correct attitude of mind. Many students of mystical philosophies fail in their search for higher truths because they neglect or ignore the physical basis of spiritual regeneration. Although the perfection of the physical body is not the primary goal of philosophy, the release of transcendental powers within a person depends largely on the health of the body. Human will. Closely related to the four etheric energy fields is that mysterious force called human will. Will has been defined as the conscious process of decision-making, but much more than decision-making activity, it also takes place in psychochemical activity. Willpower is most often an application of energy to achieve what is desired, or what seems desirable in light of accepted convictions, ideals, or principles. The direction in which life or the action of the will is most likely to be directed is determined by educational opportunities, religious affiliations, environmental circumstances, and, for example, economic standards and personal inclinations. Like many of the metaphysical energies that operate through man, the true substance and nature of the will is unknown to materialist thinkers, but the consequences it brings about can be studied and classified. The will is generally related to the purposes of physical ambition, and if these ambitions are disordered, the result is often tragic. The will can force a condition or state that is beyond the capacity of the personality and willpower. Without the proper assistance of rational strength within the being, it can only result in disaster. The illusion is so common that willpower functions as a substitute for trained skill. Some metaphysical teachers have been circulating doctrines that a person can achieve anything their will desires. Nothing could be further from the truth, but such ideas appeal to those who have little desire to equip themselves with the arduous process of genuine personal effort. Even if the will can certainly produce the desired circumstances, there is nothing to prove that these new conditions are more effective than the current state. The uninformed cannot know what they need. The calmly informed yet effective person generates the patterns they need, without heroic efforts of will. The use of willpower in metaphysical healing must be considered carefully, because there are conditions in which it is definitely indicated. For example, willpower is useful for breaking undesirable habits, controlling excessive impulses, and directing activities toward constructive channels. Moderate self-discipline is good for most people, and those inclined to be slow in making decisions, or given to disordered thinking in general, can improve their willpower with a little applied intelligence. Many who suffer from dissipation and lack of self-control are in this condition due to a weakened will. In almost all these cases, suggestion therapy is helpful. Through the judicious use of mental suggestion, the will can be restored as the controller of behavior. Willpower is a kind of whip, recommended for the lazy, but highly destructive for those who are truly ill and require a good health rehabilitation program. The only exception to this rule is the will to live. Many have recovered from seemingly hopeless illnesses through willpower alone. When combined with appropriate therapy, willpower is a vital factor in recovery. Conversely, patients who have lost the will to live can perish from relatively minor ailments. The attempt to substitute willpower with proper treatment, and the kind of metaphysics that denies the body's right to manifest the illnesses within it, can only lead to more serious problems. The whip and spur may elicit a final burst of energy from an exhausted horse, but the animal's life is shortened, and we complicate the misfortunes that afflict it. There may be times when obligation compels us to push beyond the breaking point, but this does not mean we should resort to such extreme measures. Pain and fatigue are warnings, and they cannot be ignored with impunity. The individual who, through willpower, propels themselves beyond their body's natural endurance will suffer the consequences, even if they use a religious formula to justify their actions. The gods never allow humankind to pursue any course of action contrary to the established laws governing the world. Anyone who tries to deny the symptoms of an illness and continues as if they don't exist should be fully aware that they are a hypochondriac, with symptoms that are entirely imaginary. Hypochondriacs can rarely diagnose themselves as such. Pain is a gentle but insistent reminder that something is wrong. Ignoring it is to endanger health and survival. The voice of conscience. Conscience, already mentioned in the chapter on the healer, is a mysterious voice worthy of closer analysis. Conscience frequently provides the material for expositions on willpower, thus the two are intimately connected. One theological belief holds that conscience is a spiritual organ through which God's will is revealed in the personal conduct of individuals. A little research shows that conscience, far from being the voice of a universal morality, is a very worldly and often dangerous form of subconscious opinion-making. It is the kind of opinion-making that Heraclitus called the disease of fallen reason. Conscience, in reality, is a mechanism of fear, and its origin lies in the emotional body. Essentially, it is the fear of non-conformity, constantly persuading its owner to conform to the prevailing norms. For this reason, conscience typically speaks to obedience to law, order, and tradition, and this is often constructive, because society can only survive if its members adhere to the rules established by the whole. But while these rules may be necessary, it doesn't mean they are divine. Left to its own devices, conscience would undoubtedly make a very significant contribution to human betterment, but unfortunately, its gentle ways have been seriously interfered with by religious upbringing. Most religious teachings are heavily laden with "thou shalt not," and these have a demoralizing effect on the conscience. They cause this poor faculty to lose all sense of direction and dissolve in a sea of fears. We will never have a spiritual code that solves human problems, prevents war and crime, and guides humanity to the promised land of personal and collective security until fear is eliminated from the mechanisms of soul conversion and religious practices. It is impossible to live a truly divine existence with terror in one's heart. Conscience, having become the vehicle of taboos, can no longer be trusted to indicate the appropriate course of action. A man can obey the dictates of his conscience, and yet be a danger to himself and a threat to everyone else in his community. Some have taught that conscience is the voice of karma, the principle or law that whatever a person sows, that they will also reap. But this is not always true, according to my experience with those suffering from a troubled conscience. The effect is much more likely to have originated in the parental home, where good and evil were defined according to the personal views of the father and mother. These well-intentioned adults, with their firmly held opinions, may or may not have had an intelligent understanding of the meaning of good. From the "don't do this" and "don't do that" of weary and exasperated elders, the voice of conscience was born. Time and again throughout the years, it continues to repeat itself like a parrot: "Don't do this and don't do that." A mind accustomed to this endless cycle of denials becomes acutely aware of the monotonous voice of manners in every aspect of life, chanting the same painful admonitions. Resistance to traditions is broken in childhood, before character has been formed, generation after generation, according to old customs, out of fear of displeasing the crowds who dictate the don'ts. It is through those who refuse to accept the will and attitudes of the many that progress comes to the world. These freethinkers only obey if they find some sound reason to do so, for they have learned that things are not necessarily true simply because the majority believes them. Many of these pioneers of new paths are vigorously persecuted in their own time for their refusal to conform, only to be honored as heroes in later centuries, their words and thoughts established as the basis for new standards of conformity. Many people suffer from pangs of conscience, and some deserve their remorse. But others are troubled by thoughts and actions that violate some inherited system of don'ts, even though they are perfectly normal and honorable. Let me give you a real example of just how foolish and stupid it all can be. A man came to me on the verge of a complete nervous breakdown. He was so mentally and morally ill that his life was in danger. He told me he was filled with shame, that he would never again be able to lift his head and look people in the eye, that he was a sinner. This horrible realization had ruined his digestion and destroyed his peace of mind. His conscience had been troubled. And what was the terrible sin? A religious organization he belonged to forbade its members from attending movies under penalty of losing their immortal souls, and in a moment of weakness, the devil had tempted him, and he had gone to see the movie The March of Time. Even more terrible, he had taken his children. Until that moment, it hadn't seemed so sinful to him, but as the weeks passed, his conscience had revealed the magnitude of the offense. He had broken his solemn vow, committed a sinful act, and contributed to sin in his children's lives. It's hard to believe something like this could happen today. Of course, there's nothing spiritually or inherently wrong with going to see a movie. The real blame lay with the religious group, which clung to a medieval antipathy toward all forms of entertainment. 17th century Protestants even shut down Shakespearean theatre in England. The crux of the man's remorse was breaking his obligation. He had given his solemn word and had not kept it. In this case, the victim felt guilty of two faults. The lesser one was breaking his word, and the greater one was having made such a vow in the first place. But a commitment that is unreasonable, unnatural, and not in harmony with wisdom and truth cannot be binding. No religion can prove that the deity demands such vows, and no person can keep their word once it is clear that a premise is false. Many religious organizations, and most metaphysical ones, require their students to sign various commitments and vows before becoming reputable members. Because little consideration is given to the student's character or temperament, these obligations are frequently inadequate and, if strictly observed, lead to disaster. Although most members don't take their vows too seriously and thus don't feel burdened by them, it is the sincere and conscientious person who gets into trouble. They try to live their vows to the letter, confident that the cult knows what is good for them. They continue full of faith until some of their unnatural obligations disrupt their life, forcing them to alter their habits to survive. Then they begin to have problems with their conscience. You would be surprised how many metaphysicians are having this kind of difficulty with that little voice. Of the many who have come to me for help, some tell stories that are beyond words. Many psychologists believe that once patterns of consciousness are firmly established, individuals are more likely to be happy if they conform to their dictates. This may be true for those who lack the character to correct the false impulses locked within their consciousness, but those with a philosophical mindset prefer to straighten their thinking, even if it requires a complete mental cleansing. Conscience is a valuable faculty once it has been freed from the burden of complexes and fixations accumulated from taboos. But spirituality and fear cannot coexist in the same person. There is nothing in the universe for humankind to fear, but there are many things to learn, and many laws to love and obey. General observations. Since the functions of the ethers are not visible to human physical perceptions unless dicyanine screens are used, the healer must rely on their own ability to diagnose the causes of their effects. This is not always easy. The patient's own description of the circumstances that have led to their difficulties can be quite misleading. If the patient is a metaphysician, they are likely to have an elaborate explanation of their ailment based on what they have been taught or on suggestions made by other students. The practitioner must remember that, for those of a mystical mind, all illnesses have mystical qualities and generally exist only in the imagination. Let's take the case of a woman who had been studying with several Eastern teachers specializing in breathing exercises. She developed a curious type of headache, affecting the area behind her eyes and causing great physical discomfort. She discussed the matter with one of her instructors. He believed the pain was due to overstimulation of the pineal gland. A friend who thought of another. The woman who was following similar instructions warned that the Kundalini had suddenly reached her brain and that this condition could be very serious. The dissatisfied victim then consulted a doctor and was assured that the problem was vibrational, that a long series of treatments would fix things. Several months passed without improvement, and the woman finally became convinced that she had done permanent damage to her mind. With this conclusion and in despair, she considered suicide. This was the situation when the woman came to me as a last resort. Upon arriving, she said that her condition was hopeless and that there was no reason to suppress her feelings. A few minutes of conversation clarified many important details. It is valuable for the healer to know the esoteric exercises taught by various groups and individual teachers. The moment he revealed the instructors' names to me, it was possible to dismiss the pineal gland theory without further discussion. Although these teachers had a great reputation for their spiritual powers, from personal experience I was certain that none of them had the ability to provide developmental exercises that produced results, good or bad. The only soul growth these teachers could confer was a painful experience, with its consequent maturing of consciousness. By removing this obstacle of metaphysical implication, the path was cleared to consider the facts reasonably. The pain was not an illusion, even if it was due to esoteric exercises. What caused the vital ether to densify in the frontal part of the brain? It wasn't black magic, nor was it Kundalini, nor was it an overly accelerated growth of the soul. It was simple eye strain. This enthusiastic disciple of the mysteries of life spent most of her time reading and rereading literature on her favorite subject. She read for many hours in bed, by dim light, and, imprudently, had given up most of her social contacts, cutting off the enjoyment that could have given her tired eyes a rest. A pair of glasses and moderation in her reading brought her immediate relief. The woman now enjoys excellent health and has embraced a more fundamental kind of teaching. It is rare to find a case of true disaster resulting from developmental exercises, since very few teachers actually possess sufficient knowledge of occult physiology to teach anything dangerous. However, there are numerous cases where fear and imagination have resulted in serious nervous disorders in people who believe they have opened centers of consciousness they cannot control. The pineal gland, the organ of spiritual vision. Doctors specializing in glands generally agree that the true purpose of the pineal gland in human life is unknown, and they doubt whether the gland is active in adults. These conclusions do not agree with the results of clairvoyant research, which indicate that the pineal gland is active throughout life and is the organ of spiritual sight within the human body. The pineal gland, a blue-green luminous mist, marks the magnetic field of the gland. The field's axis is tilted, and the whole resembles a miniature solar system. The shape of the pineal gland's mental field resembles a spherical glass bottle and appears to rest on the surface of the semi-liquid mist. An antibody rotates above the gland in an ecliptic. Chapter 7: The Pineal Gland and Mental Focus. Governor and regulator. The organ of spiritual sight, visibility of the gland's aura, diseases of the pineal gland, extrasensory analysis of the pineal gland. The seat of spiritual powers, control of mental life. The functioning of the pineal gland, definition of mind and brain. The subconscious mind, thought patterns, the conflict between thought and impulse, the magnetic field of the brain, the point of consciousness. Governor and regulator. The pineal gland is a small organ located roughly in the center of the brain. It governs and regulates the entire endocrine system. Endocrine glands are glands whose secretions pass directly into the bloodstream or lymphatic system. Clearly, the balanced function of the body's various ductless glands depends on the pineal gland. The pineal gland is a fibrous structure composed of material similar to the filaments of the optic nerve. The gland is closely related to vision, and deterioration of the gland is frequently accompanied by vision impairment. In a normal, healthy adult, the pineal gland contains several small granules or crystals. Although the exact function of these granules is unknown to science, they are usually absent or greatly reduced in number and size in cases of dementia and congenital imbecility. Most efforts to examine and study the physiological function of the pineal gland by physical means have been unsuccessful. Currently, hormone therapy is a recognized and valuable part of medical science, as the other glands have clearly defined and at least generally understood functions. The exceptional nature of the pineal gland has become more apparent as our understanding of the other glandular bodies has increased. The technique for diagnosing pineal imbalance is still quite imperfect, and treatment methods remain inadequate. The usual approach to date has been to attempt to normalize the function of this gland by conditioning the other glands. No satisfactory method for its direct treatment has yet been standardized. When several prominent endocrinologists were asked about the most recent scientific information on the pineal gland, they essentially agreed that its true purpose in human life is unknown. They also expressed considerable doubt as to whether the gland is active in adults. The pineal gland appears to reach its peak activity around the 12th year of human development. After this time, a regressive process begins, and the gland's function declines until its effect becomes negligible. This may be true for the pineal gland as a physical structure, but these conclusions do not align with the findings of clairvoyant research. Nearly all independent physicians who have examined the gland using extrasensory perception agree on one point: the pineal gland is active throughout life, and under certain conditions, its activity can increase significantly. The organ of spiritual sight. In chapter 16 of another book, Man, the Great Symbol of the Mysteries, I have given a general summary of modern occult thought and opinion on the pineal gland, with numerous quotations supporting the claims of clairvoyant observers that the pineal gland is the organ of spiritual sight in the human body. I will not enter into the existing scientific controversy regarding the physical significance of the pineal gland. My purpose in these pages is to point out certain metaphysical activities that I have observed in the aura or magnetic field of the gland, in investigations carried out over a period of approximately 20 years. During this time, there have been many opportunities to examine a considerable number of people in whom the activity of this gland exhibited unusual characteristics. I remain hopeful, and there is ample reason to believe, that in time material science and the occult sciences will unite their discoveries and recognize the need to complement each other in investigations of this kind. Observed clairvoyantly, the pineal gland is located near the center of a magnetic field or aura that varies from 12 to 16 inches in diameter. This aura has no exact or defined boundaries, nor are its radiations completely uniform. Rather, it appears as a pulsating, flickering energy field that intensifies under stimulation or irritation, and fades to almost imperceptibility as a result of extreme mental or vital exhaustion. Regarding the term aura, all living organisms unconsciously and continuously exude perspiration. These subtle emanations are extensions of the etheric nervous force beyond the circumference of the physical nervous system. The aura, or physical magnetic field, is therefore an emanation from the nerve endings that surrounds the body with a faint but discernible glow. These auric emanations flow from the nerve endings with an appearance similar to fine fur. When they intensify, each emanation appears as a stream of tiny geometrically shaped particles flowing at high speed from the skin's surface. The human body is not only surrounded by a field of these emanations, but each part of the body, organs, systems, and secretions has its own emanations or auras. Even individual cells, molecules, atoms, and electrons are clairvoyantly seen as centers of magnetic emanation fields. The colors, extent, and vibrational speed of these magnetic fields reveal the intrinsic nature of the structures from which they originate. No significant change can occur in the structure of any living organism without altering its aura. Visibility of the gland's aura. The late Dr. Kilner developed a technique to make certain parts of the human magnetic field visible to the non-clairvoyant eye. With the aid of Dyson screens, he was able to generate a temporary change in human optical processes that allows the average person to see the less attenuated parts of the human aura. Intensive research conducted with these screens resulted in the development of a technique for diagnosing diseases through the study of visible patterns and modifications in auric emanations. For details of his methods, see his text, The Human Atmosphere. The aura of the pineal gland is one of the main systems of visible emanations in the composite structure of the human being. It is surpassed in brightness and size only by the aura of the heart, which is the largest and most completely organized magnetic field in the human body. The heart's aura is large enough to encompass all the vital organs of the physical body, and the pineal aura encompasses all the vital organs of the brain. The energy and power of the pineal gland's aura are derived from the heart's aura, which is also the source of the reproductive system's auric field. These three intimately associated electromagnetic fields support the body's economy and explain the balance of its functions in human life. Clairvoyance is the term appropriately used to describe the form of extrasensory perception by which the faculty of sight is extended, augmented, or supplemented to include the power to observe supraphysical phenomena. The power of visual awareness is under the control of the trained clairvoyant's will, and they can shift their focus from one plane to another. As the focus shifts, various aspects of a problem can be analyzed separately. Several different vibratory qualities must be analyzed and differentiated in the present investigation. To make this possible, the clairvoyant visual approach must change with each phase of the problem. In other words, each part of the phenomenon must be examined and described in terms of its own plane, or the vibratory level at which the phenomenon occurs. If the approach is not changed, only a portion of the active force sequence can be examined. Failing to do this explains, at least in part, the diversity of testimonies that have accumulated in clairvoyant research into the invisible forces of nature. Those who have seen only partly can only describe partly. If the various researchers had focused their attention on the different levels of the invisible planes, each would have become aware of the different and seemingly disconnected parts of the processes taking place. A synthesis, whereby all processes are observed in relation to one another, requires a methodical and systematic adjustment of clairvoyant vision to each of the specific divisions of vibratory frequencies that constitute the complex process of function. The human aura is divided into 10 main levels or planes, and it is necessary to focus clairvoyant attention on each of these levels in ascending order of vibrational refinement. Only through such a thorough examination will the metaphysical causes behind physical activity be discovered and properly classified. Pineal gland diseases. Diseases of the pineal gland can be divided into two classifications. 1. Imbalance resulting from an injury or disorder affecting any gland or group of glands in the endocrine chain. In such conditions, the pineal gland shows a rapid loss of tone. If one of the lower glands is disturbed or depressed, it shifts its burden onto other glands. For example, Thyroid conditions can lead to stimulation of the parathyroid glands, which take over the work of the diseased gland and attempt to maintain bodily harmony. The pineal gland is the only gland in the ductless chain that cannot shift its burden. Therefore, it is frequently less disordered than the other glands, but when it is affected, it is more difficult to heal. 2. The pineal gland can be altered through the mind's influence. Destructive thoughts, along with their associated emotional state, can lead to physiological changes in the pineal gland's structure and function. Once altered in this way, the gland tends to suppress the functions of other glands, especially those related to reproduction. In severe pineal gland disorders, rational faculties are often involved. The disorder may not be accompanied by any severe pain, but it is particularly noticeable in the eyes. The pupils may be constricted, and there is a tendency to stare unfocused. Some visual hallucinations may be experienced, and the imagination becomes distorted. Minor disturbances are associated with fatigue, lack of coordination and coherence of thought, hypersensitivity, loss of appetite, nausea, and decreased circulation. In all cases where there is a general malaise, pineal gland disorders may be suspected. Insomnia is often present, and occasionally a sensation of pressure directly below the crown of the head is also felt. Blood tests will frequently show a calcium deficiency. Except for limited study of the pineal gland from a pathological perspective, very little real information is available about this mysterious organ. Some clairvoyant investigations have been carried out, but most observations are merely statements from occult traditions that identify the pineal gland as the third eye referenced in ancient religious symbolism. Observations of the activity of this gland in certain reptiles demonstrate that it is a rudimentary eye that was removed from the brain after the development of the current optical system. The composition of the gland itself supports these findings and indicates that it may still be sensitive to light. Extrasensory analysis of the pineal gland. H. P. Blavatsky, in the ES papers, and certain comments from her original students and disciples have indicated a possible course of study that may lead to a more complete understanding of the true structure and purpose of the pineal gland at this stage of human evolution. At first glance, the magnetic field of the pineal gland shines like an electric mist of bluish-green luminosity, with a glow around its circumference and almost invisible in the areas closest to the gland. Within this nearly spherical field, the gland appears, under certain conditions, as if in the center of a hollow globe with a bubble-like wall. The gland is not at the exact center of the globe. When viewed clairvoyantly, it is about 1/3 of the distance from the lower edge of the field. Seen in this way, the gland resembles a tiny, bright, four-pointed star. Closer examination shows that the star-shaped light source is located within the small granules. These glow fluorescently. A closer examination of the gland's magnetic field reveals that it is layered. There are 10 concentric circles, each faintly but clearly defined. Each of these circles, or rings, is orbited by tiny bright points of light. The entire gland, with its magnetic field, resembles a miniature solar system moving around the gland structure itself. The axis of the gland's magnetic field is so tilted that its upper extremity pierces the skull near the 2 small holes close to the crown. These correspond to what Hindus call the Brahma Randhra, or Gate of Brahma. According to Hindu belief, life leaves the body at death through these holes. They are connected to the brain by nerve fibers, which are burned or destroyed by the departure of the life force, and this is what makes it impossible to resurrect a person once they have died. The movement of the small points of light in the orbits in the magnetic field of the pineal gland is mathematically proportional to the sidereal movement of the solar system. It appears that the annual movement of the solar bodies also happens diurnally in the smaller glandular orbits. One day in the body would be equal to 1 year in the solar system. The tiny points of light orbiting the gland are the positive poles of the entire human endocrine system. Each of the glands in the chain extending from the pituitary gland to the sex glands has its causal nature in the pineal aura. Disorder, disease, irritation, or atrophy of any of the other glands is immediately visible as a disturbance of its corresponding energy center in the pineal system. The 7 major organs of the brain are physical extensions of these glandular vortices. All organs are physical extensions of invisible energy centers throughout the physical body. The brain is the Merkaba, or chariot, Sanskrit, Vahan, of the pineal gland, and the 10 smaller vortices in the gland's aura are the horses harnessed to the chariot of the sun, the racehorses described by St. John Chrysostom. Further research reveals that the magnetic field of the pineal gland not only has its pole tilted to correspond with the Earth's pole, but also possesses a hypothetical equator. And, in accordance with ancient symbolism, the entire magnetic field is enclosed within an empyrean or celestial layer composed of 36 constellation-like surfaces, corresponding to the principal constellations of the zodiacal and extrazodiacal orders. This arrangement need not be considered complex or convoluted. While a proper description is extremely difficult, the structure itself, when conceived as a whole, is orderly, simple, and perfectly in accordance with the analogical processes evident in nature. The gland and its auras constitute a microcosm. The Kabbalists perfectly symbolized this mystery in their Sephirotic tree. The first and highest part of this tree they called Kether. It corresponds to the pineal gland. Chokma and Bina, the second and third spheres, correspond to the right and left lobes of the brain. Kabbalistic writings state that the 10 parts of the Sephirotic tree represent the 10 parts of the human body, but that all these parts first exist within Kether itself. Thus, the entire tree is, in principle, within the crown, Kether. Similarly, the entire body and all of human life are within the magnetic field of the pineal gland, whose radiant light is the crown, the seat of spiritual powers. The implications of this ancient esoteric science are unavoidable. A. The universe is an extension of the powers that are eternally in the nature of the deity. B. Human beings are an extension of the powers that reside eternally in their own spiritual source. C. And the human body is the extension of the powers that reside temporarily within the aura of the pineal gland. Although the aura is divided into 10 parts, only the lower 4 are related to maintaining the body's physical economy. The lower 4 parts of the pineal gland's aura are involved in the distribution of the 4 ethers described in the previous chapter. The remaining 6 parts of the magnetic field have relatively little to do with the external life of man. Their function is noumenal rather than phenomenal. The 10 states of the magnetic field are more or less divisible into 2 groups of 5 each, which may be called higher and lower. The 5 lower states are directly related to sensory perception, and the 5 higher states to the mental octaves of these perceptions, or to the 5 perceptive powers for which the perceptions themselves are the means of communication. In the various realms of life, both visible and invisible, the position of the gland in relation to its magnetic field varies, regulated by the focus of each kingdom of animal creation. Among animals, the gland is farther from the center of its magnetic field than in humans. Control of mental life. Each of the 10 fields or orbits of the pineal gland can be isolated for separate analysis. this chapter will consider only the fourth field, the one that controls the mental life of the human being. The 5 orbits that make up the southern hemisphere of the magnetic sphere are also included. Those that comprise the northern hemisphere must be approached through a completely different system of analysis. Separated from the rest of the aura, the fourth field appears predominantly green. The reaction, however, is not so much to the shades of green we are familiar with, but to a kind of green perceived in the substance of light. We are aware that it is green, but we cannot expect to find a color or shade by which this green could be reproduced in pigment. This green glow is divided within its own field into very subtle divisions, making a complete analysis difficult. This green field is the actual focus of the pineal gland itself. The gland is located slightly below the center and appears to be floating on the surface of a denser color that occupies the lower 2/5 of the field. The mental field of the pineal gland resembles a spherical glass bottle, the lower 2/5 of which appear to be filled with a semi-liquid mist. At the top, the material is almost the same color but completely gaseous. The gland's structure appears to rest on the underside of the semi-liquid mist. Its glow is brighter upward than downward, and it moves slightly as if carried across the surface by a tide. The pineal gland is known to be so tightly bound to the inner surface of the brain that it is capable of independent movement. This movement does not appear to be entirely intrinsic, or rather inherent, but some of its motion is like a ship floating on water. Near the gland is a small glowing antibody, which, for lack of a better term, we will call the mental vortex. As it revolves around the gland in an ecliptic, it causes a periodic descent toward the denser substances at the bottom of the magnetic field. This vortex completes a full circuit around the central gland in approximately 24 hours. It takes about a third of this time to pass through the bottom of the sphere, when the antibody is somewhat dimmed. This phenomenon may be part of the explanation for the nature of dreaming. The effect of rearranging sleep hours to disrupt the normal rhythm of this movement requires further investigation, as it has been observed that in some people and at certain times, the complete circuit of this antibody appears to be faster. This antibody is an important structure of the menthols, or mental atoms. It has its own polarity and a rotational movement accompanied by a constant emanation. This makes the structure appear like a small spiral nebula. Alterations in the brain, the thalamus, and the anterior lobe of the pituitary gland cause alterations within the structure of this pineal antibody, the functioning of the pineal gland. In the metaphysics of the classical Greeks, the supraphysical nature of man is divided into 9 parts arranged in the form of 3 triads. To these is added the physical body, which completes the decade composed of 9 numbers, and the figure, the Pythagorean tetractys. Man would have 7 esoterically, 10. It was said that each of the triads was placed on a sphere. The first triad resided in the supreme sphere, and consisted of being, life and light, which together make up the spirit. The second triad resided in the middle sphere, which the Greeks called the upper world. This was the triad of movement. Its parts were the immobile, those that move by themselves, and those that are moved, collectively called the gods and considered as the zonic and azonic hierarchies. That is, the powers that remain in their place and those that move from their place. The third triad, inhabiting the lower sphere, was called formative. It consisted of the generating principles designated as creative, conservative, and disintegrative. Collectively, they comprised the supramundane deities, of whose order the Greeks declared Zeus to be chief. The equivalent of Zeus in the human system is the ego, or the self-complex from which personalities are suspended like flowers from a parent stem. The supramundane principles, through their extension into the 10th sphere, which is matter, produce form, which is organized matter. Of all forms, the human body is the most important for humankind. Personality is the complex that arises from the relationship between the supramundane ego and the chain of bodies it has precipitated. The ego itself, located within the magnetic field of the physical body, appears juxtaposed with the physical heart and controls the entire body by exerting its power on the subtle elements of the atrioventricular bundle. The positive pole of the ego, its radiant principle, acts upon the granules in the pineal gland and the adjacent sensitive nerve areas, which consequently become fluorescent. The negative pole operates through the sacrococcygeal ganglia and the main internal organs of the reproductive system. The ego itself has no direct effect on the physical body, except for the effect it has on the heart. Its other manifestations are achieved through the polarities it sustains. The pineal gland, therefore, occupying the middle position in the ego triad, is linked to the noumenal and phenomenal personalities through etheric connections. It is not simply a third eye in the body, it is the eye of the higher self, the focal point between the two conditions of form, the invisible archetypal form and the visible physical body. Since this focus is located in the vibration of the mental nature, it can be said to arise in the neutral etheric zone between the mind and the brain. The most sensitive parts of the physical brain, dilated by the presence of an almost intangible gas, are so refined that their ethers mingle with the lowest and closest physical dementias of higher nature. Although mingled, they never actually merge, because the two sets of rays move in different directions, but the intrusion is so close and so perfect that a neutral zone is created. This neutral zone corresponds to the middle part of the vibratory record of the magnetic field of the fourth orbit of the pineal gland. The impulses of the mind must pass through this focus as through a lens before the brain can distribute them as nerve impulses. Similarly, all sensory impulses gathered from the periphery of the nervous system must return through this lens before they can be incorporated into the mental nature itself. Definition of mind and brain. How then do we define the mind? Pragmatically, it is the cause of the mental processes we call thinking. It includes inspiration, reflection, imagination, analysis, comparison, and memory. It must also be accepted as the source of mental experience, which contains not only the evidence accumulated by the senses about experiences in objective life, but also the residual matter of past lives, all that may involve karmic memory. The mind is to the brain what the brain is to the body. It is the source and highest part of itself. It is as if a person extends beyond the limits of their physical body into a more subtle state, of which the physical body is merely the thickest and most visible part. The individual mind participates in the universal mind, of which it is a specialized area, just as the physical body participates in physical nature, of whose elements it is composed. The brain is a descending extension of the mind into matter, just as the spinal cord is an extension of the brain into the body. The difficulty of these analogies arises because the mind, although it is a form and has dimensions, is beyond the limitations of our visual power. It is mysterious to us, not because there is any real mystery about it, but simply because we cannot see it. Therefore, if the mind has the brain as its pole in the body, and is connected to the brain through certain etheric magnetic areas, the whole procedure is within the limits of our understanding. The scientific objection to the idea that there is a mind independent of the brain is easy for the philosophically inclined to resolve, since the brain must serve as a condenser and distributor of mental impulses that cannot become tangible except through some sensitive magnetized field. It is quite obvious that the removal of that field, or its absence, would result in the failure of mental manifestation. The entire brain as we know it, or even the organization of the brain as we understand it, is not essential for mental existence, But the presence of the magnetic field is essential. Simple unicellular organisms in which an individual brain has not developed are capable of manifesting rudimentary forms of intelligence. This occurs because in these unicellular structures, the brain exists in abscondite, that is, in essence. The entire cell contains potential brains that have not yet been located. The magnetic field permeates the entire cell, but its manifestations are rudimentary because there is insufficient nervous organization to coordinate or rationalize the nerve impulses. In this way, all forms participate in the mind. Modern psychology, separating itself from the broader field of philosophy of which it is essentially a part, seeks to classify and organize what can be known about the function of the mind and its reactions on the nervous and emotional systems. This art, though still in its infancy, is rapidly advancing toward a full understanding of its purpose. But psychology cannot be considered a complete science or a perfected art until its foundations are fully established in a practical understanding of the supraphysical mental life of human beings. This understanding can only be attained when scientific research is complemented and coordinated with intensive study of the mind by properly trained clairvoyants. Most modern psychological systems recognize that the mind is divided into three parts. Popular terminology refers to these as the superconscious, conscious, and subconscious mind. These minds are a hypothetical division of the pure substance of mind, whose parts are constantly interconnected in their activities. These psychological divisions align with the findings of occult research. They are simply new names given to ancient truths. The subconscious mind, the conscious and superconscious parts of the mind, are unlikely to be significant factors influencing health, as their processes are more or less evident. However, the subconscious mind poses a constant danger to those who accumulate negative and destructive thought patterns. The subtle power of the subconscious is most noticeable in those who suffer most from its machinations without being aware of the source of their difficulties. It is my sincere conviction, after years of study and observation, that a large part of so-called psychic phenomena are nothing more than psychological phenomena associated with sinister patterns in the subconscious mind. The subconscious sphere of mental phenomena could be defined as the haunted house of the mind. It is here, in the dark and grimy realm of memories, long forgotten by conscious life, that the ghosts of old thoughts and experiences walk the shadowy galleries of the mind, like the shade of Hamlet's father wandering the battlements of Elsinore. We all have a phantom life, locked away somewhere within us, and frequently, these deep-fogged shadows shake off their chains and babble their callous words into the ears of our conscious selves, causing all manner of disasters. It is important for each person to know about this individual closet where skeletons are kept, hidden sources of shame or pain that year after year haunt the present with the mistakes of the past. Some medieval writers recognized three major centers in the brain, corresponding to the three realms of Christian mysteries: heaven, earth, and hell. Hell was assigned to the ventricle of memory. This is analogous to the modern concept of the subconscious mind as a kind of personal purgatory, with torments and mocking demons amidst the turbulent flames of unfulfilled desires. It is here that old hatreds and quarrels arise to obscure the light of hope and the promise of the future. A world of madmen, filled with endless conflicts that poison the yet-to-be-born tomorrow with the noxious fumes of dead yesterdays. Habits, attitudes, convictions, and opinions gather here like bats in a dark cave. From here they flutter at night to plague dreams with their melancholy symbolism, to make the long hours of insomnia painful with the absurd shadows they cast upon thoughts. Due to the strange workings of the subconscious, fantasies become facts, fears are magnified to horrific proportions, and doubts acquire the attributes of hopelessness. The strange forces that act in this subjective sphere leave nothing untouched, where strong men, once dominated by this phantasmal world of illusions, can degenerate into hopeless cowards. There are always currents of negativity flowing from the subconscious. By analogy with music, we can say that the conscious mind is a natural pitch, the superconscious mind is the higher pitch of that pitch, and the subconscious mind is the lower pitch. Memory is primarily in a minor key, and like primitive music, it has sadness in it, a note of frustration and pain. Although the subconscious can be the repository of many good and necessary harmonies, it is far more likely to emit negative and sad tones. Visions could be visualized memories. Obsessions could be dominated by phantoms from the subconscious. Voices heard in the air could originate from the mind itself, not the spirit world. Even automatic writing could be driven by fixations that seem to live and have an independent existence in the deep recesses of the subconscious. Here, thoughts are things. Each impulse takes shape and is empowered by frequent repetition. When a heavily charged subconscious erupts into the conscious mind, as it eventually will if the condition is not corrected, life and health are endangered. The best method for dealing with fixations is to break them before they have time to take deep root in the consciousness. Resentments, regardless of justification, destroy the one who harbors them, not the adversary. Habits should not be allowed to take such firm control of life that they cannot be broken by a simple application of will. It must be remembered that people do not have habits, habits have people. The past should not be allowed to overshadow the effort of the present, nor should old sorrows be allowed to generate in the mind the pain of martyrdom. Evil thinking has its own reward, and that reward is misery. If it's too late for preventative therapy, then other means must be used. Old patterns must be broken through the intelligent use of willpower. Psychoanalysis can help, but the process is long and expensive. I have observed that one of the most terrifying aspects of the subconscious impulse is the deadly seriousness that accompanies it. Those most affected will struggle with all their might to justify their misfortunes and rationalize their worst beliefs. In such cases, a sense of humor arrives, like the brilliant bolt from the fiery sword of Saint Michael, who vanquished the Prince of Darkness and his legion of unhappy spirits. The person who can laugh at their own mistakes, who can dismiss with a smile the bitterness that has burdened their soul, can achieve much to banish the ghosts that haunt their thoughts. There should never be bitterness in laughter, but rather the sure understanding that one is the master of their own destiny, and that it is within their power to lift the burden of their sorrows by seeing through them, understanding them, and cheerfully accepting the lessons they have to teach. Thought patterns. If there are three distinct mental currents flowing from the mind to the brain, and from the brain to the body, it is also true that there are three distinct reflexes flowing back through the nerve to the brain, and from the brain to the mind. Mental impulses cause glandular reflexes, and the entire glandular system is involved in human thought. Conversely, glandular impulses, interpreted first biochemically and then psychochemically, affect the mind and mental attitudes by conditioning sensory and emotional reflexes. Thus, a virtuous cycle is established, and we realize the absolute interdependence of all manifestations of life. One school of endocrinology states that mental disposition or attitude is a matter of the glands. It would also be fair to say that the glands are a matter of disposition. Harmony of mind results in increased health of the body, and harmony of the body improves the disposition of the mind. The entire purpose of man's mental evolution is to bring the mind and body into perfect coordination. If the demands of life make this impossible at any given time, then the mind, as the higher part, should receive the greatest emphasis. It is possible for the mind to excel the body because of its natural and inherent excellence, but it is impossible for the body to excel the mind under the pattern of a normal personality. because of its total dependence on the higher part. The excellence of the human body should not be considered solely in terms of its physical health, but rather measured in terms of its degree of refinement and sensitivity to mental impulses. The dispositional equation is the result of the mind's complex working through the brain. The brain stores sensory experiences and reactions in its auric field. This material is absorbed by the mind and transmuted into experience. In a sense, the brain is a kind of stomach that receives certain nutrients, but the digestion of these nutrients and the assimilation of their energetic elements are reserved for the processes of mental alchemy. The undigested parts of experiences also affect the body's economy. These impulses are associated with the secretion of the pituitary gland. The flow of this secretion differs with each individual, and its psychic charge depends on the undigested mental material still present in the brain. Personality can be symbolized by an equilateral triangle, with its base firmly established on the physical reflexes and its apex in the sphere of the mind. The mind itself can be likened to an inverted pyramid, its base firmly rooted in the substance of the mind, and its apex pointing downwards to intertwine with the top of the pyramid of the brain. This symbolism was used by medieval Rosicrucians to explain the mystery of thought. The conflict between thought and impulse, the eternal conflict between thought and impulse, becomes explicable. It is a struggle between a higher and a lower power for dominion over mental phenomena. The struggle is seemingly even because the brain, although far less powerful than the mind, is closer to the body and more easily understood. For this reason, the ancients symbolized the brain with the moon and the mind with the sun. Leonardo da Vinci went so far as to declare that the moon generates tides in the fluids of the brain. He expressed this as an opinion during his time, which is now widely accepted. The neutral zone between the magnetic fields of the brain and the mind is entirely qualitative and can only be recognized with the aid of clairvoyant perception. We will refer to this neutral zone as a lens, because it is a transmitter of mental light. Ancient philosophers referred to this as the light of the soul or the light of reason, the mysterious light that illuminates every person who comes into the world. It is the sidereal light of the microcosm, according to Paracelsus and the Kabbalists. Certain reflexes are transmitted to the brain by the eye's lens, but it is the magnetic lens that distributes noumenal and phenomenal impulses. Just as defects in the eye's lens cause distortion of vision, defects in the magnetic lens cause distortions in mental activity. Such astigmatism of the magnetic lens is the basis of many abnormal psychological states. Since the magnetic lens exists by virtue of the combination of two magnetic fields, its clarity requires precise adjustment and combination, and these are affected by every mood of the individual, and by every mental and emotional reaction. The mind, as the source of reason in man, flows downward to manifest itself through this lens. Pure thought is always qualified or conditioned by the state of the lens. As it passes through the lens, thought distorted by any flaw that may exist in the lens itself is reflected in the sensitive centers of the nervous system. The coordinated sensory input from the brain's magnetic field is reflected upward or inward through the lens, and the reflection projected onto the attenuated surface of the mind itself is also distorted according to the lens's imperfections. Thus, the quality of the lens determines the accuracy of the impulses passing through it. The lens can be damaged in various ways. If the two magnetic fields cannot mix at least partially, the result is idiocy. If the mixing is partially achieved, we have the subnormal and the foolish. In such conditions, no reasonable images are reflected either upwards or downwards, and only mental confusion and opacity remain. Let us now consider how the brain's magnetic field may be affected. The brain's magnetic field. Every thought that arises within the personality complex takes on a geometric form in the brain's aura. This has been verified by clairvoyant research and the discoveries of trained psychics. These patterns in the brain's magnetic field have been called thought forms, forms that consist of a color, a number, a sound, and a shape. They precipitate with the same regularity and design complexity that we see in snowflakes and geometrically shaped creatures like radiolarians. The repetition of any particular series of thoughts intensifies these thought forms. The result is that they constantly appear and disappear within the magnetic field. Some persist, and others quickly fade away. When these thought forms represent sudden moods or passing opinions, they shine brightly with various colors and emit a subtle sound. When they represent established convictions, they grow steadily. Their intensity increases through the fixity of the will. Thus, a man who attends a concert and is affected by the music will interpret these impulses through a mood that is clearly visible as light radiations or waves in the magnetic field. When the concert ends and the mind returns to its normal concerns, these waves fade and other patterns take their place. But intense hatred will continue as a constant pattern and can increase in intensity for years. Such an intense pattern can eventually dominate and completely permeate the entire magnetic field, affecting all other thought forms that may arise. What the metaphysician calls thought forms, the psychologist calls fixations, complexes, phobias, and neuroses. The strongest patterns, due to their vibrational frequencies, produce subtle but permanent changes in the entire substance of the brain's magnetic field. The result is a distortion in the combination of the brain's magnetic aura with the mind's magnetic field. And in extreme cases, there can even be a complete rupture between the two fields. Under such conditions, the individual loses their reason as a result of destructive fixations. In many cases, the combination of the two magnetic fields is damaged rather than destroyed, and various degrees of evident mental abnormality become apparent. Nature, eternally striving for balance and normality, has devised self-correcting processes to break strong fixations in the brain's magnetic field. Thought forms can be combated or neutralized with opposing thought forms, based on the principle that two opposing vibrational rhythms can neutralize each other. Furthermore, thoughts or emotions of extraordinary intensity can cause such a disturbance within the brain's magnetic field that they can burn away entire areas of complexes and fixations. Observing the brain's magnetic field during moments of ecstasy or great emotional euphoria is key to several systems of mental therapy. The mind itself also affects its own magnetic field, but the effects are generally less obvious than those established in the brain. Less subject to transient moods than the brain, the mind does not create thought forms. Rather, the entire magnetic field of the mind changes gradually, usually from the periphery toward the center. The modifications appear as the color changes in the outer fringe of the field. The hues gradually move toward the center until the entire field changes color. Within a single color, there are countless shades because the mind is constantly modifying the color values. In many cases, however, there seems to be a peculiar and relatively permanent overall tonality of the mind, and the changes are modifications of this tonality. The lens formed by the superposition of the two magnetic fields is in constant motion within itself. This movement continues even during physical sleep, although colors and shapes are somewhat faint. A series of personality complexes can frost the lens. Personality patterns, like frost images on a window, have form and definition, but they also possess an element of life unseen in the frost images. Mental energy passing through the lens reflects these thought patterns into the nervous system, where they become the source of countless disposition complexes. Sensory perceptions, sending their energy upward through the lens into the mind, similarly cause the reflection of the lens patterns to be projected onto the surface of the mind, like stereopticon images on a screen. In this way, the testimony of the senses is conditioned by the attitudes of the brain, and the rational impulses of the mind are modified and distorted by these same patterns. The consequence is a distortion of the testimony of both the brain and the mind, resulting in a personality complex that we have long accepted as intrinsic to human thought processes. If the lens becomes heavily obscured by patterns, the amount of light that can pass through in any direction is correspondingly limited. Thus, a person may have experiences without benefiting from them, or they may have profound visions that they are unable to interpret and act upon. As long as this obscuration exists, it can be said that they see through a dark glass. Ultimately, what all reasonable human beings desire is to be able to perceive clearly and understand what they perceive. To achieve this, the lens must be kept clean. If it is already clouded, it must be properly cleaned. If it is cleaned, the result is clarity and consistency. To achieve this clarity, the body must supply sufficient magnetic energy to sustain the brain's magnetic field. Emotions and thoughts must be free of serious complexities, and the will must be directed to break the patterns that arise from an incorrect reaction to life's experiences. This can be called psychological conditioning. It can be preventive or corrective. Preventive conditioning preserves existing normality, while corrective conditioning aims to break existing complexes and fixations. At the same time, the mind itself must be strengthened. This is achieved by stimulating the rational faculties through study, reflection, and meditation, using a formulated technique. The direction of the imagination, and the ordering of all mental impulses, was the purpose of ancient philosophical education, in contrast to modern educational theories. The whole problem of thought boils down to the fact that vibration is affected by every attitude, thought, and emotion we express. The point of consciousness. People's views and beliefs are constantly changing, and a viewpoint is a place in matter or mind from which we see some external object or opinion. As we obtain new information about the object of our attention, our point of view changes, and the appearance of the object itself is modified. If several mental faculties concentrate on a single object, the mental rays converge and form a powerful focus. The will to attention is the will to perceive, and consciousness lies at the center of the converging rays of the faculties of attention. Wherever the point of attention is at any given moment, the self is there. The focus of attention is constantly shifting, whether it be on the physical, emotional, or mental nature. And where it remains most of the time is the key to an individual's dominant temperament.